Since 1945, the power to erase cities in seconds has been held by a select few nations. But how did they get it? This series reveals the secret histories, scientific breakthroughs, and political rivalries that built the nuclear world. From the Manhattan Project to Soviet espionage, from India's desert tests to Israel's enduring secrecy, each story uncovers how ambition, fear, and science collided. In this episode, we begin with the United States and the creation of the first atomic bomb, the experiment that changed humanity forever.
It began with fear that Nazi Germany might build an atomic bomb. In 1939, refugee scientists, including Albert Einstein, warned President Roosevelt of the danger. The United States launched the Manhattan Project, a vast secret network of laboratories in Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, and Hanford. Thousands worked in total secrecy to turn theory into the most powerful weapon in history. In July 1945, the Trinity test in the New Mexico desert lit up the sky and proved it was possible. Weeks later, Hiroshima and Nagasaki showed the world what that power meant. The nuclear age had begun.
When the United States detonated its first atomic bomb in 1945, Joseph Stalin was not surprised. He already knew. Deep within the Manhattan Project, Soviet spies were stealing the secrets of the bomb. Klaus Fuchs, Theodore Hall, and others passed blueprints and calculations to Moscow, helping the USSR build its own device in record time. On August 29, 1949, the Soviets tested their first bomb at Semipalatinsk, just 4 years after Trinity. It was a direct copy of the American design, and it shattered the illusion of US nuclear supremacy. The KGB and Soviet scientists had won a race they weren't supposed to run. With nuclear parity came the Cold War, a new age of fear, secrecy, and espionage that would shape the world for decades. In the aftermath of World War II, Britain refused to be left behind. American secrecy laws cut off nuclear cooperation, and London feared slipping from superpower status. In 1947, the United Kingdom launched its own bomb program, Project Hurricane. British scientists who'd worked on the Manhattan Project brought home priceless knowledge, joined by captured German experts from Operation Paperclip. The USA had agreed to share their research as the UK was heavily involved with scientists on the Manhattan Project, but was broke after the cost of World War II. The USA kept the knowledge, but that didn't stop the innovative Brits. Within just 5 years, Britain had built and tested its first atomic bomb. On October 3, 1952, in the Montebello Islands off Australia, a grey dawn lit up with a blinding flash, Britain's first successful nuclear detonation. It proved that scientific determination and political will could restore Britain's seat at the top table. But success came with cost: radioactive contamination, moral questions, and the start of Britain's long debate over the balance between deterrence and danger. Success came with cost: radioactive contamination, moral questions, and the start of Britain's long debate over the balance between deterrence and danger. After the devastation of World War II, France faced a painful truth. It was no longer a superpower. Defeat in 1940, an occupation under Nazi rule, had scarred its national pride. By the late 1950s, General Charles de Gaulle vowed that France would never again rely on anyone else for protection. While the United States and Britain shared nuclear secrets, France chose independence. The nation launched its own atomic program, drawing on its civilian reactor research and the talents of scientists like Pierre Guillaume and Francis Perrin. The project's goal was simple: build an entirely French bomb, designed, tested and controlled on French terms. On February 13, 1960, deep in the Sahara Desert, France detonated its first nuclear device, codenamed Gerboise Bleu, the Blue Desert Rat. The explosion towered over the sand dunes near Regan, confirming France as the world's fourth nuclear power. The tests continued across Algeria until independence forced Paris to relocate to the remote atolls of Mururoa and Fangataufa in French Polynesia. There, throughout the 1960s and 1970s, mushroom clouds rose above the Pacific as France perfected both fission and later thermonuclear weapons. De Gaulle declared the new arsenal Force de Frappe, the strike force, a deterrent completely independent of NATO command. He pulled French forces out of NATO's integrated structure, stating bluntly that France's defense would never depend on Washington or Moscow. France's doctrine focused on the power of credible retaliation, a small but survivable force capable of devastating any aggressor. It was a philosophy rooted in autonomy and honor, not sheer numbers. By 1968, France had successfully tested its first hydrogen bomb, joining the elite thermonuclear club alongside the United States, the Soviet Union, and Britain. Over time, this independent spirit shaped Europe's balance of power. Even as the Cold War ended, Paris maintained its arsenal, now submarine-launched and highly modernized, as a reminder that true sovereignty still meant self-reliance. The French nuclear program was controversial, protested by pacifists and condemned for its specific tests, yet it remained an unmistakable symbol of France's will to act alone. From the sands of the Sahara to the turquoise lagoons of the Pacific, the Force de Frappe was not just a weapon. It was France's declaration that national pride could be as powerful as the bomb itself.
In the ashes of revolution and civil war, Mao Zedong's new China looked outward for survival and found it in science. By the early 1950s, the Soviet Union agreed to share nuclear research, training hundreds of Chinese scientists and shipping entire laboratories east. Under this partnership, Beijing built its first reactors at Lop Nur and Jiuquan, and trained a generation of engineers who believed atomic power would secure the nation's future. But when the Sino-Soviet alliance collapsed in the early 1960s, Moscow withdrew its experts and tore up the blueprints. Overnight, China was forced to continue alone. Refusing defeat, physicist Qian Sanqiang and his team at the China Academy of Sciences rebuilt every component from scratch: uranium processing, warhead design, detonation systems, all in total secrecy. On October 16, 1964, a flash of white light burst over the deserts of Lop Nur. China had tested its first atomic bomb, codenamed 596. Less than 3 years later, on June 17, 1967, it detonated its first hydrogen bomb, achieving in 32 months what had taken the US and Soviet programs 7 years. Mao called it a paper tiger with teeth, but the message was unmistakable. China would never again be humiliated by foreign powers. From Soviet blueprints to self-reliance, China's nuclear success was not just a scientific triumph, it was national redemption forged in isolation.
By the late 1960s, India faced a strategic dilemma, surrounded by nuclear powers, China to the north, Pakistan to the west. It needed to prove that its scientific achievements could defend the nation and define its independence. Under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and visionary physicist Homi J. Bhabha's legacy, India transformed civilian atomic research into a secret weapons project at Pokhran in the Thar Desert, the codename Smiling Buddha. On May 18, 1974, a blinding flash lit the desert sky. India called it a peaceful nuclear explosion, but the world saw something else: the birth of a new nuclear state outside the superpower system. The blast equaled roughly 8 kilotons of TNT. Scientists in white overalls emerged from bunkers carrying Geiger counters as tricolour flags rippled in the heat. India's test redefined global non-proliferation. It inspired pride at home, suspicion abroad, and drove neighbours like Pakistan to start their own race. Smiling Buddha was more than a weapon. It was a declaration that knowledge and courage could challenge the nuclear elite. By the late 1960s, India faced a strategic dilemma. Surrounded by nuclear powers, China to the north, Pakistan to the west, it needed to prove that its scientific achievements could defend the nation and define its independence. Under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and visionary physicist Homi J. Bhabha's legacy, India transformed civilian atomic research into a secret weapons project at Pokhran in the Thar Desert, the codename Smiling Buddha. On May 18, 1974, a blinding flash lit the desert sky. India called it a peaceful nuclear explosion, but the world saw something else: the birth of a new nuclear state outside the superpower system. The blast equaled roughly 8 kilotons of TNT. Scientists in white overalls emerged from bunkers carrying Geiger counters as tricolour flags rippled in the heat. India's test redefined global non-proliferation. It inspired pride at home, suspicion abroad, and drove neighbours like Pakistan to start their own race. Smiling Buddha was more than a weapon. It was a declaration that knowledge and courage could challenge the nuclear elite.
In 1974, India's nuclear test at Pokhran sent shockwaves across the subcontinent. In Islamabad, Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto declared, "We will eat grass, but we will build our own bomb." The man who would make it happen was Abdul Qadir Khan, a young metallurgist working at a uranium enrichment plant in the Netherlands. Using his access to top-secret centrifuge blueprints, Khan copied critical designs and quietly smuggled them home. Back in Pakistan, with Chinese technical assistance and a sprawling underground network of suppliers across Europe and Asia, he began constructing the Kahuta research laboratories. By the late 1980s, Pakistan had produced enough highly enriched uranium for several weapons. In 1998, weeks after India's second nuclear tests, Pakistan answered with 5 explosions in the Chagai Hills, proof that South Asia had become the world's newest nuclear flashpoint. But AQ Khan's ambitions didn't stop there. His covert network sold nuclear technology to Iran, Libya, and North Korea, making him one of the most controversial figures in modern history, both a national hero and a global outlaw. Pakistan's bomb was born of rivalry and survival. A Mutazari, a mirror to its neighbour's power, and a warning of how far nations will go when pride and fear collide.
Of all the nations with nuclear weapons, none guard their secret more closely than Israel. Officially, the Israeli government neither confirms nor denies possessing nuclear weapons. Unofficially, almost every intelligence service in the world accepts that it does. The story begins in the 1950s, when the young state of Israel, surrounded by hostile neighbors and haunted by the memory of the Holocaust, sought a deterrent that would guarantee its survival. Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion authorized a covert program disguised as peaceful research. With France's cooperation, Israel built a secret reactor complex deep in the Negev desert, near the town of Dimona. Officially, The site produced power for research and medical isotopes. In reality, it became the core of Israel's nuclear project. French engineers supplied reactor designs, heavy water, and reprocessing technology, while Israeli scientists learned to extract plutonium from spent fuel. In return, Israel provided France with valuable intelligence during the Suez Crisis, a political bargain sealed in silence. By the early 1960s, U.S. satellites had photographed the Dimona reactor. Washington demanded an explanation, but Israeli officials insisted it was for civilian purposes. American inspectors were allowed limited visits, yet entire levels of the facility were hidden behind false walls and locked elevators. President Kennedy pressed for full disclosure. Prime Minister Levi Eshkol offered diplomatic reassurances and little else. By the late 1960s, the Central Intelligence Agency quietly concluded that Israel had assembled several nuclear devices. The United States accepted a delicate understanding: no public tests, no official acknowledgement. This policy of deliberate vagueness became known as nuclear ambiguity. Israel's doctrine is simple and chilling: the Samson option. If the nation's existence were ever threatened, it retains the ability to strike back with overwhelming force. Over the decades, this silent arsenal has shaped regional strategy without a single test or declaration. Israeli technicians are believed to have adapted warheads for aircraft, ballistic missiles, and even submarines. The actual number of weapons remains secret. Estimates range from 80 to over 200, stored deep beneath desert bunkers and mountain tunnels. In 1986, former technician Mordecai Vanunu broke the silence, leaking photographs of Dimona's hidden reprocessing chambers to the British press. He was kidnapped by Mossad agents, returned to Israel, and imprisoned for 18 years. His revelations confirmed what many had long suspected: that Israel's nuclear capability was real, sophisticated, and far beyond guesswork. Today, Israel's leaders still refuse to admit what everyone already knows. Ambiguity remains a weapon in itself, a psychological deterrent that keeps adversaries uncertain. While other nations parade their missiles, Israel maintains silence, confident that fear of the unknown is sometimes more powerful than open threat. Hidden behind mountains and propaganda, North Korea built one of the world's most secretive nuclear programs. It began in the 1950s when the Soviet Union provided a small research reactor for peaceful purposes. For decades, Pyongyang's scientists quietly studied atomic theory, while the regime proclaimed loyalty to its socialist allies. But after the Cold War fractured and the Soviets withdrew, Kim Il-sung saw the atom as the ultimate insurance policy, the one weapon that could guarantee survival against foreign pressure. By the 1980s, with limited help from abroad and access to Pakistani centrifuge designs through A.Q. Khan's shadow network, North Korea had begun enriching uranium at Yongbyon. When international inspectors demanded access, the regime stalled, lied, and eventually withdrew from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. On October 9, 2006, a deep tremor shook the mountains of Punggye-ri. The world soon realized it was not an earthquake, but North Korea's first nuclear test. The yield was small, yet the message was enormous. The regime had crossed the final threshold. Subsequent tests in 2009, 2013, 2016, and 2017 showed rapid improvement, more powerful detonations, compact warheads, and the unveiling of long-range missiles that could potentially reach the United States. For the Kim dynasty, nuclear weapons became both sword and shield. a means to deter invasion, demand concessions, and preserve a regime that would otherwise collapse under its own isolation. Today, North Korea claims it can mount warheads on intercontinental missiles. Intelligence agencies debate how reliable those claims are, but the symbolism is clear. The smallest, poorest of the nuclear states has forced the world to take notice. From borrowed blueprints to underground detonations, North Korea's nuclear journey is a story of secrecy, defiance, and survival. A reminder that once knowledge escapes, no wall can contain it. In the 1970s, deep beneath the plains of the Kalahari Desert, South Africa built a secret nuclear arsenal. Using its vast uranium reserves and help from Western contractors, Pretoria developed 6 complete atomic bombs, small, compact weapons designed for aircraft delivery. The project was born in secrecy during the height of apartheid, as the regime feared Soviet influence in neighboring Angola and Cuba's growing military presence in Africa. While other nations built weapons to deter invasion, South Africa's goal was political survival, a silent warning that it would not be pushed aside. Engineers at the Pelindaba facility assembled the devices using highly enriched uranium produced at the Valindaba plant. Intelligence reports hinted that Israel provided limited technical advice, though both nations denied cooperation. In 1979, an unexplained flash was detected over the South Atlantic, the so-called Vela incident. To this day, debate continues over whether it was a joint Israeli-South African test or simply a satellite malfunction. But as the Cold War ended and apartheid began to crumble, President F.W. de Klerk made a remarkable decision. Rather than risk future instability, he ordered every nuclear device dismantled. By 1994, South Africa became the first and only nation in history to build atomic weapons and then destroy them all voluntarily. When international inspectors arrived, they found nothing but empty vaults and decommissioned components. It was the quiet end of a program that had once placed Africa on the nuclear map. South Africa's disarmament stands as a rare act of wisdom in a world obsessed with power. It proved that restraint can make history as surely as ambition. And so this journey, from the deserts of New Mexico to the mountains of North Korea, ends with a single question. Will the next century repeat these mistakes or finally learn from them? If you've enjoyed this documentary series, please subscribe for more detailed history films and give this video a thumbs up. It genuinely helps with the algorithm and supports the channel. Thank you for watching.